There. This meeting is being recorded. Okay.
I mean, the chairs.
So whenever you're ready, I can just start. But thank you so much for joining me here today.
Yeah, of course. We were actually we were on campus yesterday. We live close by, so we took our daughter to visit Rice for the first time, and it was really weird to be on campus and for it to be so empty.
Mm-hmm. And I actually flew back like a day ago, so it is really strange to see it so different.
Do you know approximately what percentage of students are back on campus?
It's around 40 to 50%, so a lot less.
Okay.
So today is September 13th, and we have invited Mr. and Miss Fung to do the oral history interview for the Houston Asian American Archive. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Ashley Sang, and I wanted to start off by asking, where and when were you guys born?
You can start.
Okay, so I was born here in Houston, Texas, January 25th, 1984.
My name is Diane, and I was also born in Houston, but I was born on February 23rd, 1985.
How would you describe the household that you grew up, like the siblings, the environment?
I have an older brother. He's 11 and a half years older than I am. So it's pretty significant, the gap. He was actually born in Taiwan, and I was born here. So it was pretty interesting growing up. I think, had two very different childhoods, even though we're in the same household with the same parents.
I also have an older sibling. Her name is Amy. She's 2.5 years older than I am. We were both born and raised in Houston. And so a little bit different than Willa, and maybe we'll go into this further, but he traveled around the world growing up versus I lived in the same townhouse complex in the medical center for like 20 years.
So how would you kind of describe that neighborhood then, next to the medical complex?
So the reason that we lived in the medical center is because my mom for the past 40-ish years, worked at MD Anderson as a pharmacist. And so my parents made the decision to live in the medical center so that my mom could be close to work. What that meant is that the decision to live there was not for their children's schooling. It was purely so that my mom could get to work in a timely manner. She had to get there pretty early. And what that means for me as a kid growing up there was that I didn't really have that neighborhood experience. Sometimes when we're talking about growing up and he talks about riding bikes with his neighbors, I didn't really have any of that. And not to say that there weren't kids that also lived nearby, but just the area that I lived in, it was a bunch of apartment complexes and townhouses, mainly housing people that worked in the medical center. So it's not necessarily like West University where people are moving there for their families and for the schools. And as a result, we were zoned to I believe we were zoned to Cullen. And so growing up, I didn't attend the school that I was zoned to. Even starting with daycare, there was a I'm forgetting the name of it, but there was a daycare across the street, basically for all the people who had to work in the medical center. So that's where I went for daycare. And then once I needed to go to elementary school, they sent me to a Greek Orthodox school. So I was one of a handful of Asian kids at this private Greek Orthodox school, and that became pretty costly after a while. So then I applied to a magnet school, River Oaks Elementary, also not in my neighborhood. So my parents had to drive me and pick me up from school, and I always did after school activities. And then again for middle school, another magnet application to go to Lanier Middle School. So that's where I went to middle school. And then high school, again, I applied magnet to get into Bel Air High School. So I grew up in the medical center, but for schooling, I was always just, being driven to school or bused. So I didn't really grow up in a neighborhood per se.
What about for you, Mr. Fung?
So my family moved around a lot. My dad was a geophysicist, and he enjoyed traveling. So I think we moved around about every 4 or 5 years. And so I was born here. We lived out in Katy, but then we moved when I was 6 to New Orleans. And we were there for about 3 years, and grew up in Kenner. Had a pretty normal neighborhood. I had neighbors, kids that went to the same school I did. We hung out after school. We went to each other's houses, trick-or-treated with them, just typical neighborhood kid stuff. And when I turned 9, we moved to Brunei, Darussalam, on the island of Borneo. So then I kind of had to start over. There was no Facebook or email back then. I kind of lost all my friends. We might have written each other a couple of letters, but it's hard as kids, and especially as boys, to have that interest in writing letters. So easy to make friends, once we moved to Brunei. All the expats, all the people who worked for the same oil and gas company, pretty much lived in their own bubble, and all the kids went to the same school, and we all lived very close to each other. So again, it was, despite being a different country across the world, it was a very normal childhood, I feel. A couple of years later, for middle school, I went to boarding school in Singapore, because back then, Brunei, I believe, did not have any middle schools that were taught in English. So it was just normal for every kid that went to Panaga school over there in the camp area to then go to boarding school afterwards. So Singapore was really fun. Boarding, it's kind of like going to college, a lot of freedom in a way. Was there for 2 years, really developed a fondness of Singaporean cuisine. Just the flavors there were really good, and a lot of good memories as a kid, having so much freedom. And then my parents kind of decided, well, eventually the goal is for me to go to one of the university in the US. So they wanted me to go back for high school. So in 8th grade, we moved back to Houston. This time we settled in Sugar Land. So I went to high school at Clements, made new friends. Again, a lot of them were really close by. We rode bikes together, explored, went to the movies, the mall, etc. Just, I guess, pretty typical, high school kid stuff. So that was my childhood.
Well, when you were talking about that, it brought up memories of, since I didn't have neighborhood friends, my friend groups were pretty much composed of 2 camps, or 3 camps. The first camp was my Chinese school friends, right? So I attended the Institute of Chinese Culture. And the Institute of Chinese Culture was started by a lot of a lot of my parents and their friends who immigrated from Taiwan, right? So they immigrated in the late 70s and the 80s. So the Chinese that we were learning in that school was the bo po mo fo, right? Not the pinyin, it's the traditional style. So every Saturday, because my parents were really active, my dad was the principal, that's where we went every Saturday. So I had a lot of friends that came from there. So I had my Chinese school friends. I attended there ever since I was 4, all the way till I graduated high school. So that was my first group of friends. The second group of friends, obviously, is the friends that I made at school. And then the third group of friends were the friends that I made going to a summer Chinese youth camp called CYC. So every summer for 1 week, we would go to camp and I would meet these kids from Sugar Land, from Kingwood, from Louisiana. And so a lot of the schools that I went to growing up outside of Bel Air, they didn't have a huge Chinese population. Growing up, I was really jealous of my friends who lived in Sugar Land, and they would talk about, after camp was over, they would see their friends again at school, and I'm like, I had that 1 week to see everybody, and then it was just, we would talk on good old AIM, Instant Messenger, and I'd have to wait till the following summer to see them again, or be really excited a week or 2 after camp to have a reunion. That was big for me because I was more isolated from that Chinese community than everyone else was.
Do you guys feel like there's still kind of like a cultural shock, especially for you, Mr. Feng, like going to all these different like international locations?
So when we moved to Brunei, it wasn't so much, so many, the camp there pulled in expats from around the world. So a lot of people from Europe, other parts of Asia, a few from the US. So I think I always grew up in pretty diverse settings. Maybe the shock was more on my end of such a different culture, a predominantly Muslim culture, and very different style of food there, which helped broaden, it introduced me to new flavors at a young age. I think even as a kid, I was always very much into food, but it really helped expand my palate.
Oh, what about for you, Miss Feng, living as an Asian American?
Growing up, can you repeat the question again?
So was there ever any like cultural shock living as an Asian American in Houston?
Cultural shock. I kind of have to go back just because now that we're here in Houston in our 30s.
I do think Houston has always had a pretty big Chinese population, certainly compared to New Orleans.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that at any point there was cultural shock, in that I feel like because we were both born and raised here, we associate just as much as being American as being Chinese. So I don't think there was a whole lot of assimilation, right? I think if you want to talk about shock, we had more kind of reverse cultural shock when did we move to Shanghai? 2012? 2013. So 2013, we moved to Shanghai for what ended up being, was it a year and a half?
Mm-hmm.
A year and a half. And even though we're Chinese, we're not mainland Chinese. And people can see, based on the way that we dress and the way that we talk, instantly they've labeled us, hey, you're American born Chinese. And that's not necessarily,
well, in my case, they would assume either Taiwanese or Australian. I don't know why.
So there was definitely a shock being American born Chinese and feeling very comfortable growing up in America, and then moving to China and all of a sudden really feeling not ostracized, but we didn't necessarily get the benefits of being American because we weren't white. right? So our coworkers and friends and colleagues who were not Chinese American, but American American or European or basically not us, the moment they said like ni hao or something in Chinese people sort of just bent over backwards to be like super accommodating to them and really nice to them. And it's almost like when they saw us, they're like, why did you come back? What are you doing here? And they were just really confused. So I feel like in that instance, there was more shock than growing up Asian American in Houston.
So why did you guys move to Shanghai for that period of time?
I think we just decided we wanted to immerse ourselves somewhere in Asia. It didn't have to be Shanghai, but we looked at Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Japan, Singapore. And I was already a cook at the time, and Diane was teaching, and we eventually kind of came to this realization that it made the most sense for her to find a job first, and to use that job to bring us over. So she kind of applied throughout Asia, and it just happened that a school in Shanghai was the one that she got into. So that's how we settled there. We just wanted to, potentially take our Mandarin Chinese to the next level, but really more just an adventure before we decide to settle down with a family.
Yeah, so we met at Rice University. I think in an Asian studies class, I'm not really sure. And so we both graduated with majors in Asian studies. So me, it was Asian studies and sociology. For him, it was Asian studies and managerial studies. And we majored in Asian studies, I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, mainly because we wanted to continue taking Chinese classes at the university level. And by doing that, it was, take a handful more courses and you could complete that major. And I think once we graduated and started working, we realized that both of us never studied abroad through our time at Rice. And we wanted to really live abroad, have that immersive experience instead of just vacationing. Because when you're vacationing, it's more about just like a very cursory, eat as much as you can, see as much of the touristy sites. And we really wanted to leave Houston, jump out of our comfort zone and kind of develop ourselves, both linguistically and just, as people, as young adults. And I think that was a really good experience for us. Yeah.
Did that have any impact on your restaurant, like Burger Chan?
Not really. I have a lot of different experiences. Honestly, I've worked at probably almost as many restaurants as I have years in the industry. I kind of jumped around to learn different things. I went to culinary school. I mean, certainly every place that I've been to, every place that I've worked, I take away some ideas, some recipes, some knowledge that I apply to everything that I do. But I think it was interesting. I was very fortunate, and I landed the head chef job at a restaurant that was co-owned by originally 3 people. So a Cantonese American from New York who does architecture, and a Shanghai native who went to Japan for 8 years, developed his passion for music, went back. He's been referred to as the godfather of hip hop in China, and a Vietnamese American who was the chef. And so these 3 people came together and opened up a pork-centric restaurant called The Grumpy Pig. And I was just lucky enough that when I worked at Oxheart in Houston, that chef came to eat with his fiance and her parents. And he told me about the restaurant. At that point, we already knew we were going to move to Shanghai. So it was kind of like, well, let's exchange information, see if it pans out. And it just turned out that he was going to move back to New York and he wanted a replacement. So when the time came, the timing worked out, went over, kind of took over the reins, tried to improve upon what they had already set up and just continue what they were doing. But it was kind of an interesting situation where the core menu was not something I came up with. The menu has a lot of influences from Vietnamese cuisine, Japanese cuisine, American cuisine. I kind of took the job just not in the sense of just so I have financial stability, but that was definitely one of the main reasons I took that job. It's just like, it's available, it's perfect, it's an okay fit, the money is good enough. But it was a really good experience. It was my first kitchen experience where I was in a more managerial side of it. I, up to that point, was pretty much have always been just a cook, and this was the first time I was a chef. And I think in that sense, it was very helpful. Even though to this day, I'm still not really a manager type person. Still a challenge.
I was listening to what you were saying, and I was thinking about just kind of reflecting about on our journey, and I think graduating from Rice, at least for me, like when I got into Rice, like the way to advance in life was very formulaic, right? So when you go from high school to college, you kind of go down the list of try your best on the SATs, do these extracurriculars, right? It's very formulaic, like how do you become the best? How do you excel, right? And so I did that, right, to get into Rice. And then once I got to Rice, I tried my best. And then once I graduated, it was like, what do I do next? It's like all of a sudden the formula, if you don't follow a certain path, right, if you don't become an engineer, if you don't become a doctor, if you don't, become a lawyer, the path is a little bit less clear, right? And so for me, I really had no idea what I wanted to do once I graduate with a sociology degree. And so I started applying to graduate schools because that's just something I'm good at. I'm good at taking tests. I'm good at applying to schools. I'm good at that. So I figured, okay, I don't really know what I want to do. So let me just do more school. And I like learning and I like teaching and I liked learning sociology. So I did that. And that's a whole separate story, but I ended up getting there and realizing very quickly that that wasn't for me. But I think that from high school to college, it kind of felt like the world was my oyster. And it's like, oh, you have these 5 things or these 10 things that you can choose from, and then you'll choose one. And I think there was sort of a wake-up call when I started applying to jobs, right? I started applying to teaching jobs, whether it was Houston or whether it was abroad. And people were like, oh, what's Rice University? And I think I lived in a bubble in Houston where everyone's like, oh man, Rice University is the best. And then you go to a different place, whether that different place is Seattle or whether that different place is China. And all of a sudden, all that cachet you thought you had, you don't have anymore. And so I guess what I wanted when you were talking, people ask, like, how did you open this restaurant? How did you get to here? How did you get there? And it's sort of just unfolds naturally. It's not like I had these 5 choices and I picked the top, and then I had these 5 choices and I picked the top. It's like, crap, I need a job. Let me throw a bunch of resumes out there and see what sticks. And our first jobs were not necessarily glamorous. Like your first job out of college was not what you thought you would ever do, right?
What, Typhoon books?
Yeah, so he worked, you can tell her what you did after.
I mean, my first job out of Rice University was very much just a kind of a entry level job. It was a Asian book distributor here in town. Very nice place, nice owner, nice coworkers. Just not very challenging. I wouldn't say necessarily a good fit for my skill sets. Uh, I worked basically with libraries, basically in sales, just trying to get libraries to buy our books because they usually have really big budgets.
Yeah,
That was my first job.
I mean, just when you were talking and talking about Shanghai and how you got that job and how I got the teaching job in Shanghai. Basically, I was applying to a bunch of international schools and wasn't hearing back. And then his older brother used to live in Shanghai, and I asked him to ask his brother where did they send their kids, and they said SMIC private school in Shanghai, and I applied. And I wouldn't have found out about this school otherwise, right? And it just got me thinking, like, when I really reflect back, people, you know, they look at your path and they're like, oh man, how did you do this? How did you do that? And it's like, a lot of the times something just falls into your lap, and you just need one opportunity to take that next step.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of just unfolds. So that was all I wanted to say on that point. Yeah.
I also know you did a lot of teaching like in Houston as well, with the HISD you teach program. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when I graduated from Rice, I was accepted into a sociology PhD program at the University of Washington in Seattle. We flew out there to Seattle. I did a quarter of my coursework, and I was really unhappy. I was really unhappy because I instantly knew that graduate school wasn't for me. I knew that I didn't want a life full of just research, and there wasn't one thing that I was passionate about, and I was really torn because I'd moved all this way, I'd committed, everyone like knew that this is what I wanted to do, but in my heart it just didn't feel right. And so I took a leave of absence from the school, went back to career services, took that, you know, career test, and the top two things were teaching. I've always been really interested in teaching, and editing. So I took two jobs once I took a leave of absence. The first job was at Kaplan. I taught GRE classes. And the second one was copy editing here and there. And I very soon realized that copy editing was something that I liked doing to help friends, but it wasn't something that I liked to do as a job. So I quickly crossed that one off the list. And when I was teaching at Kaplan, I discovered that I really enjoyed teaching. And so once I kind of solidified that, formally withdrew from UW, it's like, look, I thought that this is what I wanted to do. Turns out that's not what I want to do. Okay, I want to teach. So then we moved back to Houston because Seattle is very expensive. So we moved back to Houston, moved back in with our parents, reapplied for schooling. He can talk more about his path, but for me, we moved back to Houston. So I originally applied to some teacher certification programs here in Houston. I started a little bit at U of H, but then turns out he applied to a culinary school in Austin. So then I applied to UTeach, which is at the University of Texas in Austin, and then I moved up there with him. And the UTeach program is an amazing program, and it's predominantly for undergraduates at UT. Back when I was an undergrad at Rice, I did take a few education courses, but Rice is not the type of school that is more career focused, right? So bigger state schools kind of have more of that, like teacher certification and whatnot. And Rice did have a pathway, but I took a few courses and I wasn't super interested at the time. So then the UTeach program I did post-baccalaureate, it took about a year and a half, and I concentrated on middle school math. Growing up, it was funny, growing up going to Saturday Chinese school, my dad was the math teacher, even though he's an engineer by trade. And his form of teaching is very old school, very traditional Chinese, where they basically just throw hundreds of problems at you that don't require any like creative problem solving, but it's like learn the method and then do it again 100 times. And honestly, growing up, I really disliked that kind of math. I was more interested in more interesting problems. And same with teaching math. Like honestly, growing up, I hated my dad's math class because I felt like he didn't teach the fun part of math, right? Chinese people, they're not really interested in the why, they're interested in just getting the right answer. And I feel like more in the American system, it's not enough to just memorize the formula. You want to derive the formula. You want to see, more of the applicability of what you're learning. And to me, that's really interesting. And I also think that math gets a really bad rap, right? Like if you don't get it one way, and if your teacher is only comfortable teaching it one way, then you feel like you're not good at math. But I feel like if you're a really good teacher and you have a strong understanding of math, you can kind of understand where a student is coming from, how they're thinking, and get them to understand the concept better. Maybe not the way that the textbook says it, maybe not the way that you taught it the first time, but maybe the second method, this third method. And for me, that's my passion in teaching. And so once I completed the UTeach program and got certified, this was back when there was like a total hiring freeze. So like I got my certification and nobody wanted to hire anybody. And a lot of teachers were being let go. So thankfully, since I grew up in Houston, I had some contacts in Houston. My math teacher at Lanier Middle School, throughout the years, throughout high school, college, and beyond, we always stayed really close, which is really odd thinking about that, to have like a good relationship with any teacher, let alone a middle school math teacher. Like I've been to her house, I've met her children. And this is all because growing up, I was a mathlete, so I participated in Math Counts. It's a middle school math competition. Anyway, so she had some contacts and she's like, Lanier Middle School, the school that I went to growing up, they had like a mid-year issue with one of their teachers, and they're looking for someone. And so incidentally, I was like, well, I'm looking for a job. I'll take it. And and then that was really fun to go back to the school that I went to, and some of the teachers that I had as a student, I was now working with, which was kind of weird. So yeah, I taught at Lanier for a few years, and then we moved to Shanghai, and I taught in an international school. And then when we moved back, and we had a kid, I put teaching on hold. And then once he got the restaurant kind of up and running, or before he had the restaurant up and running, I started tutoring at T.H. Rogers, another HISD school. And my intention coming back was to like ease myself back into teaching. But clearly that didn't happen because the past 4 years I've been working at Burger Chan, so that's a different story.
So then for you, Mr. Feng, what drew you to culinary school after Rice University? I know you've always had like an interest in the culinary arts, but.
So when we moved to Seattle, I found it pretty hard to find a job. I applied to a bunch of places in our first month there, and pretty much had no leads. Any place that did reply ended up being just very basic sales jobs, cold calling people, and just things that I wasn't very interested in. So one day I kind of just thought, what about cooking? Not necessarily thinking long term, but just I always wanted to cook better. At that point, I wasn't a very good uh, home cook. I was adequate, but I wanted to get better. And I thought, well, if I could somehow get into a restaurant and learn how to get better and get paid while I'm learning to get better, it's kind of a win-win. So just kind of by chance, we were at a sushi restaurant and there was an apprentice behind the counter and he was Caucasian. So, you know, we were chatting as one tends to do at a sushi bar and just talking about, like, well, what led you to the sushi restaurant? You know, he's like, yeah, you know, it's kind of weird seeing a white guy behind the counter, but I'm just, you know, I've been in kitchens for 10 years and he was just like, it's really easy to get a job in a restaurant. Every place is always understaffed, looking for help. A lot of it's entry level. And I just wanted to pick up a new skill. So here I am at this sushi restaurant. And after thinking about it for a couple of days, I was thinking sushi makes sense. You know, there's no cooking involved. It's all knife skills and, you know, hand forming things. So I applied to a bunch of places, eventually got a job um, at a place called I Love Sushi. And it was it was incredibly difficult. It was going in with no professional experience. Um, I felt so slow and so clumsy and so stupid for the first couple of months. Cut myself very frequently. Um, I was actually very surprised they didn't fire me after a couple of weeks. I think I was very lucky. I think if I had gone to almost any other restaurant, I may not have stuck in food. I might have been let go and I might have just thought, okay, I will always just be a consumer of food and not a creator of food. But they must have been really desperate because they kept me and I kept trying. And I think one thing I really appreciate now, after all these years and seeing new people come into other restaurants, trying to learn, is all of my coworkers. Well, one thing that kind of stuck with me is at the very beginning, they really encouraged me to not be afraid of cutting myself. Versus, I feel like in most restaurants, especially a hotel restaurant, for instance, it's always like safety first. Don't cut yourself. You know, we don't want to have to fill this thing out. Like say, like, you know, X employee got injured, or we don't want you to lose productivity. We don't want you, you know, potentially to need to go get stitches. Um, Here from the very beginning, you know, some of the other cooks were just like, you know, we really wish we had worked on our speed. You know, some of them were so fast, so talented, so skilled, but then some of the other ones were like, you know, I learned how to do everything the right way. And as a result, speed was harder to come by later. And over there, they kind of just, I don't know if, but they were just like, you should really try to do things as fast as you can, even if you're not sure you can do it. And as a result, I cut myself badly a number of times, but I kept doing it, I kept going. And eventually I improved probably after a few months. It took a while. And from there, you know, I think part of the reason I was able to do it was not living at home with parents. I think it's scary as an Asian or just as anyone who went to college to tell your parents that you're going to go pursue a career that is so limiting in advancement, in options, in, you know, the even when you reach the very top, unless you are extremely lucky, you're probably not going to make very much. So, you know, kind of did the whole time with the whole intention of stopping at some point. But then we moved back to Houston. I started my job search all over again. Not surprisingly, everything was entry level. I was basically getting the same jobs I was getting when I was applying in Seattle. Nothing that I felt was worth my time. And, you know, I definitely felt like my parents thought it was just a phase, that it was over, that I would go back into an office setting. But eventually, I kind of worked up the courage to tell them, hey, I think I want to try cooking again. I want to keep going and see how far I can go. And my dad, very traditional Chinese guy, his response is just so typically Chinese. It's just like, well, then you got to go to school. You got to go to culinary school. If you can't advance in restaurants if you don't have a degree in restaurants, which is not true. Most restaurants actually don't care that you went to culinary school, and you definitely get picked on by the majority of people who work their way up. So, but I jumped on the opportunity because I knew it would be the quickest way to see the most things and learn. And, you know, I think randomly on a Saturday, I was applying to a bunch of schools, a few of them in New York. So the big ones like Culinary Institute of America, ICE, and then a couple of ones that are near here. So maybe maybe one or two in Houston, one in Austin. And just by chance, the one in Austin, even though it was a Saturday, replied to my application within 5 minutes. I think I was at Cafe Latte in Chinatown. I was applying, and then suddenly I get a phone call, and I'm like, what is this? And I picked it up, and it was a school, and they're like, yeah, we would love to have you here. Come check out our campus. And since it's Austin, it's very convenient. So I think that weekend or the next one, we drove up to take a look. And, you know, obviously not as glamorous as going to a place in New York, but also given the convenience and everything else, it made sense. So I chose the one in Austin. It was a like cordon bleu. And then, so we moved there.
Can you tell me about why burgers specifically?
So, full disclosure, burgers, not my passion. No. I like eating burgers. They're great. Cooking them, not so much. It's not much of a challenge. At the time, after we moved back from Shanghai, I wanted to do Southeast Asian food. So I kind of thought back, and I really miss a lot of the foods I had in Singapore. And you know, I thought it would be pretty cool to do a Singaporean restaurant. The ones that keep popping up in Houston, whether it's Singaporean or Malaysian, they're really good ones. For whatever reason, don't stick around. A couple of so-so ones that survive, but they tend to just be better at strictly Chinese food and not so much the Singaporean and Malaysian food. So I was looking to do a Southeast Asian restaurant near where we lived at the time, and still do, so the Montrose area. And just couldn't find a location. It was very hard to find a location. Every place that had an opening favored vendors, restaurateurs who already have an existing, you know, concept, so they have proof of concept. I'm going in there with basically no idea, and just trying to wing it. And I think probably, fortunately, they could see that, and I didn't end up getting any places because I probably would have been in over my head. But eventually, a friend who owns Greenway Coffee and another friend who owns the Rice Box, they had stores in Greenway Plaza. So it's an office building with a really happening food court underground. And they're like, there are restaurants here that are looking to get out, like this burger restaurant. So they made the introductions. I wasn't very thrilled about it. I wasn't interested.
I don't know.
So I said no. And fast forward a couple of months, I'm just getting impatient, getting itchy, and kind of just like, I don't know when I'm ever going to find a place where I can open up. I know I don't want to work for anyone else. So I reached back out and they're like, yeah, it's still here. Let's talk about it. So we talked about it. They were asking for X amount for me to jump in there and take their concept. And I ended up agreeing to it, even though it was kind of overpriced. Even though knowing I'm not using any part of their concept, I didn't think it was a very good concept. It wasn't doing so well. So I came up with my own concept within, the realm of burgers. What drew us to it ultimately was pretty low rent. So it seemed like, okay, even if this doesn't really take off, we only have to shell out X amount per month. It's not the end of the world. It's just lunch service, potentially breakfast if we wanted to. So that's good for family life because our daughter was born. So it's kind of like, we don't have as much time in traditional restaurants. You're there really late.
And it's only weekdays.
So the hours were good. The rent was good. It's kind of like, even though it's burgers and even though there are a lot of limitations, it felt like it was the right opportunity at the right time. And so we opened up and no regrets. It's been good. We had to change our name partway through because we opened up as Kuma Burgers, which means bear in Japanese. It inspired our logo. You can see over here, but it was inspired by a cooking comic manga called Shokugeki no Soma, or Food Wars. And there's a character in there that wears just an apron when he's cooking, and there's a bear on it. And it was actually Diane's idea. So thought it was cute. We ran with it, and then we got served with a cease and desist from a place out in Chicago, and we changed our name and trademarked it this time. Made sure it would be ours, and it's been good. We recently closed due to coronavirus. It's not a bad thing. I think a lot of people think it's a bad thing, and they're always like, oh, we're so sorry. And it's like, yes, it's sad, but it made sense. It's been very stressful since the pandemic. Staffing has been kind of wishy-washy. People are like, my roommate got it, my parents got it, I don't know if I got it. Just out of an abundance of caution, having to close every now and then or just run really understaffed, and not to mention sales were way down. So we decided to close. We do have our other location that we are working on set to open next year. We think it's gonna be a really good opportunity. So we're continuing with burgers. I haven't given up on burgers. It wasn't what I wanted to start with, but I think it's an okay vehicle for my abilities. I do want to do more out of our next outpost. I think we're going to do dinners, so hopefully we can do a lot of non-burger items too.
So then, what are you going to be doing in kind of like the meantime?
So in the meantime, I have been doing some private chef events. people contact me to go cook for their house, usually a party. Tends to be quite profitable. And I've started a YouTube channel, so just trying to create more content for my YouTube channel. You know, we both like to boulder, so finding time to go to the bouldering gym. I think out of most gyms or physical activity places, it's relatively safe in the sense that it's a large space. They cap the number of people that can go in at any one time. So it's very easy to socially distance. I think we're usually, you know, more than 10 feet away from anyone. It's easy to just stay away. And it's mask on the whole time. So just trying to climb more. And recently I've been trying to lose some weight too, because I've been 25 to 30 pounds overweight compared to my college weight for over a decade now. And with restaurants, it's just hard. It's the stress, the hours. Usually you're shoveling food down as fast as you can. So you choose things that are high in calories so you stay full. So recently I've switched to predominantly lower calorie foods, eating slower, eating more often, and it's been quite helpful. So just improving the quality of our lives, really.
On my end, HISD just started virtual schooling. And for privacy reasons, because we're not celebrities, but we're quote unquote public figures as the co-owners of a restaurant. So I'm very protective of our daughter's privacy. I don't reveal her face online, and so I've dubbed her Emoji Baby, because I would show a picture of her and then I'd put a sticker, I'd put an emoji on her face, and now she's just known as Emoji Baby, and we call her that so that we don't reveal her name. And so Emoji Baby was supposed to enter kindergarten this year. And because of coronavirus, it's virtual. And what that means is from 7:30 to 2 to 3 p.m., she's supposed to learn everything in front of a laptop, which is a big ask for a 5-year-old. Our daughter, for better or worse, is usually not glued to screens the way a lot of other kids are, right? You put a movie in front of them and you've got 2 hours to yourself, but 30 minutes in, she's like, I want to play with you. We're like, no, just watch that movie. And so we knew that virtual schooling was going to be a challenge, and I have the teaching skill set to make that as manageable as I can. And so when we were debating closing our restaurant at the beginning of August, this was definitely one of the considerations that it made more sense, right? So this past week, we take turns in supervising her learning, but between the two of us, he's better at doing the stay-at-home meals, right? So making sure that when it's breakfast time, we have breakfast. When it's lunchtime, we have lunch. And so I don't have to do everything. And then I'm better at like making sure that our daughter is paying attention, making sure that she's engaged, making sure that she's muted, right? That's an issue that a lot of the kindergartners are dealing with when you're on Zoom or Microsoft Teams. If not everyone is muted, then you're just hearing all the kids and you're not hearing the teacher. And so that's been a very interesting challenge. I think it's very easy to complain about it because it's not an ideal scenario for most people. Virtual learning doesn't replace the benefits of in-person schooling. And especially for 5-year-olds, right? You don't have the 19 other kids around you to have that peer pressure to pay attention. And so it's been a really interesting challenge to tackle. and to also document. So ever since coronavirus reared its head back in March, we've been pretty transparent about how it's affected us on social media. And so once we closed, I continued to be not 100% transparent, right? I'm not showing you everything, but just being really transparent about the difficulties of websites crashing and students not paying attention. And I think it's really important because not everyone is living the same COVID life, right? And some people, let's say if you don't have kids and your job is really easy to do from home, it's not that hard. And for other people, if you have multiple kids and you have jobs where you have to be on site, like it's on the other spectrum, and it just every day feels impossible. And I think that for a lot of people who don't work in restaurants or don't have kids or don't have this or that, right? It's just really interesting, right? Because a lot of people wonder, and now that social media is so prevalent, it's so easy to kind of like, instead of you wondering, let me tell you what it's like. And I find that helpful, and it starts a dialogue with a lot of strangers that I've never met, whether they are also parents, whether they are also restaurant owners. And I found that really valuable to kind of connect with people during this time where it's actually very difficult to connect with people that you normally would. So that's been a new 2020 thing for us.
I also know that you guys have been doing some like hospital meals while BurgerSean was still there. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I mean, because way back in March, the moment there was a stay-at-home order, boom, right? We are underground and we serve predominantly the people who are in the adjacent office buildings. And, once 11:30 hits, they just leave their computer, they come downstairs, they get in line, they order, and it's pretty steady traffic for all of the vendors down there from 11 to 1, right? And then we would close at 2. And then once people were either instructed or wanted to work from home, overnight, boom, empty. And we were like, what do we do? And we closed. We closed
for 2 weeks.
We closed for 2 weeks. A, because everyone was supposed to stay at home, and B, we had to figure out if it was worth reopening, if it was safe to do so, all this, and we were not initially on the same page about that.
I didn't want to open.
He didn't want to open. I did. And we ended up reopening. And without your built-in clientele, I mean, those first few days, the first few days were fine in that you have all these supporters, whether they're friends, family, online supporters, they come out. But that's not sustainable, right? Because you can't just have all these people who out of the kindness of their heart come out to support you once. They're not going to keep coming Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So,
though I will say for the entire time that we were open, the 4 months or so, like we had a pretty big group of regulars that would order at least once a week, if not 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive.
I mean, it's super impressive. But after a few days, and this is still at the beginning of COVID, so we still had that fighting spirit. Like, how do we stay alive? So I did some internet troweling to see what opportunities were out there. And one of the opportunities I saw on Instagram, right, other restaurants would post, hey, we did these X amount of meals for this hospital sponsored by blank. So whoever it said sponsored by, I would Google them, I would contact them. I'm like, hey, we are available to also do these meals. And what I think people don't realize is we're not doing these meals out of the kindness of our hearts. what's happening is that other amazing individuals are donating to these third parties, and then these third parties connect individual people or business, whoever, donations to restaurants, and then deliver it, or we deliver it to the hospitals. And so I kind of just applied to anything that I could see, and started to get some hits, right? Because at the beginning of March, there was a lot of momentum, a lot of people were donating. And so we were thankful, we were lucky enough to get a gig close to midnight, was it? It was, which prior to COVID, we'd be like, no, we close at 2, ask somebody else. But we were like, how many do you need? What time, right? We were just like, we will do this. And we didn't even have the rest of our staff. It was literally us and one other person, Jose. And we didn't even make burgers because it didn't make sense. So we made Hainanese chicken rice, like 200 portions for midnight. What was the organization called? I'm blanking.
Feed the Frontline.
Feed the Frontline. So Feed the Frontline is a huge organization. And we did that. And that organization is really great in that they're sort of equal opportunity, right? So they weren't going to come back and keep using us. They were going to, take donations and provide the opportunity for another restaurant. So I had to continue looking for opportunities after that one. And then I reached out to an organization started by Rice MBA students. And that one was called Snacks for Med Staff. And, I'm sort of playing up like, hey, we're also Rice alum. And I'm like, I'm going to play up any sort of advantage I might have to like whatever I can get. And so that one, and this is the beauty of social media, right? Is that with hashtags, with everything, it's like really easy to tap in on opportunities. So we did that one. We did one through the Texas Restaurant Organization. And the thing about that is they were great, right? Because we're used to banging out like 200 transactions a day. And on average during COVID, it'd be like 20 to 40. And so the question is, how do we fill that? Not only in terms of sales so that we're not losing money, but also to keep our staff morale up and to keep them busy and to keep them motivated. And so the hospital meals, they weren't every day, but they were definitely good for us to just feel like we were doing something. But they started to dry up by June, right? Because after a span of 3 months, right, like people can't keep giving forever, and everyone, the people that were behind these organizations, they were volunteers. They had day jobs, and by June, right, they had to go back to their consulting job, they had to go back to their teaching job. And so once those opportunities went away, we really had to evaluate what we could do to keep going.
So what were some of the most, how did you guys, safety-wise, adapt to the coronavirus situation in the restaurant?
We consulted the CDC guidelines, right? During March and April, when all of this was new to us, I was reading that website daily. I was printing out all the guidelines, I was pasting it on the walls, I was compiling just all the do's and don'ts. And so the first few weeks of March, masks weren't required, right? So if you go back and look at social media, even though coronavirus was out there and there was a lockdown, it wasn't a thing. Masks were recommended, but it wasn't as pervasive as it is now. Ironically, people are all about gloves. And so one of his pet peeves is that non-industry people have this false sense of security seeing hospitality workers wearing gloves. But what they don't realize is that sometimes, or a lot of times, restaurant workers are wearing these gloves but then touching their face, touching their mouth, and then touching your food, right? It's this false sense of, oh, they're wearing gloves, they must be safe, versus if you don't wear gloves, you can constantly, right, wash your hands and be hygienic.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is prior to BurgerChan, and at BurgerChan, because we are an open kitchen and we're doing ready to eat foods, the expectation is to wear gloves at all times. So we have been doing that since we opened. But prior to that, you know, at a Japanese restaurant doing sushi, traditionally you never wear gloves. I did a lot of work at fine dining places that only open for dinner service. And at those places, you never wear gloves because health inspectors don't come out at dinner time. We have gloves, so when they do a random, inspection during the day, everyone suddenly puts on gloves. But otherwise, everyone works with their bare hands. You wash your hands. The problem with gloves, and we wear them at BurgerChan, is they're supposed to be single task. So it should never be you do one thing and then you switch it and you keep using them for a different task. But when you take off your gloves, technically you're supposed to wash your hands before your next pair. But more often than not, especially in any busy kitchen, you don't have time. So even if you try your best to stick to that, the best you can do is just switch gloves. You don't have time to wash your hands. You're just going from one glove to the next. And I think that's very typical for most kitchens. Either that or you just don't wear gloves.
Yeah, but going back to at the beginning of COVID, right? We did post a video. I think it was relating to us banging out a big order for a hospital, and at that time we weren't wearing gloves, or one of the girls wasn't wearing gloves, and I think at that time, or this was an old video, and we weren't wearing
the girl's
masks.
Not a cook.
Yeah, she's not a cook, so she's literally just putting boxes into bags. But we were getting comments like, where are the gloves? Where are the masks? And then I think we were like, we're kind of the type of people, maybe borderline rebellious, where if someone tells us to do something, we're like, well, if we don't believe in it, we're not going to do it. And it's not that we were anti-mask, because we're very pro-mask, especially now. But I think it was just, and this goes back to just like a weird, I could go off on a tangent about dealing with comments and internet trolls. But anyway, let me steer the conversation back to once it became very clear that mask wearing was important, not only to protect others, right? We went out and we purchased masks, and not the single use, but like a cloth mask. And it was very important for us to use the ones where you could tie behind the back, right? So you can't take it off during service, and it's a very secure fit. So we bought one for each of our staff. We instructed them on how to wear them properly, because even though people are wearing masks, half the time they're not wearing it properly, or they're not even wearing the proper type of mask. So for us, that's really important. For me specifically, I'm a rule follower. So if you give me rules per CDC guidelines or whatever guidelines, I'm going to follow them to the T, right? And so, we wore masks, and as the co-owner manager, I made sure I was watching each person like a hawk, right? So if your mask was slipping a little bit, redo your mask. If you touched your mask, go wash your hands, right? And so that became one of my new duties. And we did temperature checks. And we kind of ramped up everything, like logging and more contact tracing, once we actually had to close due to COVID positivity on staff. I forgot what month that was, maybe June. I think it was June. And you hope, kind of like with dental hygiene, like, hey, if I brush my teeth twice a day and I floss, like, I'll be fine. And so I had that same mentality with COVID, right? Wear the mask, follow the rules, you'll be fine. The problem with that is that as owners and managers, you only have so much control over your employees. And I mean, you have control over yourself, but with employees, the difficulty is that a lot of employees have multiple jobs. They have housemates, they have family, right? And all of a sudden, before COVID, I didn't care what you did after work, as long as it wasn't illegal. Now I'm in everyone's business, right? I have to, now if your roommate, who I don't even know, if your roommate has a pool party and then gets sick, that now affects my employee, right? And then my employee, let's say, wasn't doing anything wrong, but the fact that they live with someone else who now got sick, I'm now one man down. And then, once the positivity rate in Houston really skyrocketed, all of a sudden it was like, I'm one man down, I'm two man down, I'm three man down. It's like, I can't open. And there was a lot of public scrutiny about being ultra transparent, going above and beyond CDC guidelines and really telling the public. And it's not to say that we were hiding anything. It's that the public doesn't always need to know certain things, right? Especially if it's controlled. But public perception is that if you're not being 100% transparent, you're hiding something. And so that's an additional stress, right? And so we...
Okay, I think you're missing a big point. Is when someone on our staff got it from their other job or from their housemates, everyone on staff tested, everyone came back negative. We've been in the presence of people that were positive at work in close proximity for 8 hours a day for multiple days, and we've never gotten it. That first time that we closed, everyone was negative. It shows mask wearing works. Subsequent times, we were a lot more careful. The moment we think someone might have it by them reporting something, they stayed at home. Eventually they tested positive, they never came back. Everyone else took the test again to be safe. Everyone's still negative. So I think when wearing masks properly, it really slows down the spread. I think it's true because we've had multiple instances before we finally closed where we were in close contact with someone that was positive and no one ever got it from anyone else at work. Yeah. It's only from other things that they do outside of work.
That's true. And I think what really helps is that when we reopened after we closed 2 weeks in March, we made the decision to do online ordering only, to the detriment of potential sales, because people are really used to walking up to the storefront, picking up a clipboard, checking off exactly what they want, right, and paying, right? They're used to that. And a lot of people, they don't like to be inconvenienced. They don't understand that the online ordering is better for both parties given COVID. And so we lost quite a bit of sales because of that. And, we got verbally assaulted because of that. People, office workers calling us stupid and all these things. But as a result of being online ordering only, we were really able to create a barrier. Like literally we had tables and chairs in front of our storefront that had a separation between customers and between staff. And that created a lot of peace of mind, not only for us as owners, but also for the rest of our staff to say, we can control each other. Like if it's really hard to tell customers they're wearing their mask wrong. It's hard. They're strangers, you're supposed to be accommodating versus, I can control my staff and say, hey, you're doing this wrong. And so because we were online ordering only, it really allowed us to say, like, y'all are gonna do whatever you're gonna do, whether you're wearing a mask or not, or whether you're yelling at me, this is my space. You either order or you don't. And then if you do order, here's your food. Like, even if they're not wearing a mask and they ordered, we just drop the food on the table and we just scoot right on back. And so people can argue that we were overly cautious.
Well, despite having tables with maybe a 6-inch clearance on either side, we still had people go across that barrier.
Yeah, they would like find a tiny gap in between the tables as if like that's what you were supposed to do. Like, oh, that's the entrance we created for you.
Or one guy who just wanted to grab our napkins.
It's
Like, are you
ridiculous.
serious?
Or, so it's really hard to hear, right, with masks on. So they would approach and then take off their mask because they thought that that was the smart thing to do. And so it just became, all of these things, it became very stressful to run a restaurant. You've lost most of your built-in clientele. The remaining ones either don't want to order from you because you're online ordering, or they say racist things like, do you serve bats? Or they can't find us, or they think our hours are too restrictive. All these things, we were just fighting such an uphill battle, right? The stress of every time I get a early morning text, who's going to be out, whose family member is potentially sick, right? And then testing to this day is really hard, right? To be able to get reliable and quick results is still difficult to this day. It was just like, is this really worth it to be selling on some days like 20, 30 burgers? Like, we're not even breaking even. Like, I can't even cover payroll. Like, we're opening at a loss. And it's been happening, and the hospital meals kind of helped to at least break even, and other things were helping. But by July and August, it was just like, I don't know how much longer we can do this, because I think back in March, people are like, oh, by July, everything will be fine, right? And now we're in July, August, and it's just like, I don't know, people are crazy, the government's crazy, this is all crazy, I don't know, and everyone's just exhausted. And it's like, us included, we were exhausted, our staff was exhausted, and it just felt like, okay, maybe we should close preemptively on our terms so that we can take our time and energy and just kind of divert it to something else that makes more sense during this downtime while people are adjusting to going back to school and all these things, and then just focus on our second restaurant. So that's what we've been doing.
How do you think that the restaurant scene and then your new restaurant, the Galleria, will kind of change post-COVID then? You see any lasting changes?
So potentially, we haven't thought that far yet. Thankfully, not thankfully, our restaurant has been delayed a number of times through various things, but we're hoping that by the time it opens, things will have stabilized a little, normalized a little. Hopefully there's a vaccine by then. Our menu system was kind of inspired by a sandwich shop called Which Wich. So theirs, it's like printed directly on these brown paper bags, and you take the bag, check off all the things you want. I really loved that system. I thought it was genius. And so we did it, but just kind of on paper on clipboards. Since COVID, we got rid of the clipboards. So we haven't fully figured it out. One potential, clipboards and then the Sharpies that go along with it, everyone is touching. And of course, they say surface transmission is not that high, but it's also kind of an unnecessary risk. Maybe there's a chance that everyone just needs to order online. Maybe we have, I don't know if it's any better, but maybe self-ordering kiosks that get sanitized after every use. Something.
Yeah, we're still in the brainstorming stage because we have a bit of time. But a few weeks ago, we had our landlord called us, and Will's just straight up said, we're not opening our dining room till there's a vaccine. And I think they were really shocked to hear that, because a lot of restaurants are trying to maximize whatever if it's 50% or 75%, they're trying to maximize, right, the dining room. But for us, we still don't trust other people. That's the main thing. And when you open up your dining room, it's just so hard to control what other people are doing. And we'd rather just not deal with that, I think.
Yeah, there are enough daily challenges in operating a restaurant under the most ideal circumstances. My threshold for bullshit is not high enough to open up a dining room in the middle of this pandemic. I will probably stab some unruly customer one day.
I think what's also difficult is that a lot of restaurants have tried to open up patio space. And while that's well-meaning, we live in Houston. And Houston, well, we love Houston, and
Too hot.
it's not a patio city, right? And we've tried it too. We've sat outside, we've gone to a farmer's market, and within 5-10 minutes, we're like dying or sweating, and our daughter is cranky, and I think it's just it's really challenging to pivot in that respect in terms of making dine-in safe. I think that, for lack of a better word, I think some people, I don't want to say delusional, but they want to believe that if they're outside, they'll be fine. And I'm like, you're outside, but you should still be distanced. Like you can't just like be next to each other and like take
Versus
selfies.
now any restaurant with a patio, you look at the patio and it's packed.
It's
They're
packed.
packed like sardines and no one's wearing a mask and everyone's partying. It's just like, okay, this thing's never going to end until we get a vaccine and convince most of America to take the vaccine. So
Yeah.
that's cool.
So we're not slated to open till early 2021. You know, people talk about vaccines coming soon. I think we're not even cautiously optimistic at this point. We're just cautious. And we're trying really hard not to like let the pessimism get the best of us. I think that's the coping strategy.
How do you think the government could have better supported like the restaurant industry during this period of time?
Whew. I'm not sure that they could have, honestly. I mean, everyone is like, sign this petition, sign that petition. Where's another handout? Where's another, PPP or something? And it's helpful, but if this drags on for too long, I don't think there's much to save. I think it's just inevitable places will close. This is just, unfortunately, weeding out places, and it's just one of those things that's going to affect everyone. And I don't know that you can bail out everyone. It's not, I think it sucks, but I don't know. Because, what can you do? Even if landlords don't charge rent, you still have costs. What do the landlords do? Where do the landlords get their money from? Eventually, there's just not enough money to save everyone.
Yeah, and I feel like maybe it's a Chinese mentality to not rely on handouts and to not wait on the government assistance, right? Obviously, we applied, just like Chinese people are like, apply for all the scholarships that you can, right? So we applied for all the grants and PPP and everything that we could, but we were also like, we can't wait and rely on this as our, just wait. You have to think realistically, how can I survive on my own? And I think part of it is like, our parents immigrated here, right? It's not like we grew up here multi-generational. We have a lot of resources. We have a lot of trust. And not that we have distrust of the government, but it's sort of like, take care of yourself.
I mean, that, when we closed, we've had people come out and be like, man, that's great. You can jump on that unemployment now. And I think there might still be a $300 benefit or something. And we're like, we're not going to apply for unemployment. We have ways to make money.
Well, it's also like,
we're not helpless.
Julian, like, I can't tell anyone I'm on unemployment.
And the thing is, it's like, there are people who legitimately need unemployment, and we're not that group. We have options. We have ways to make money. So, so we're lucky.
And I mean, you'll be the first one to know this, right? And this is very Asian. They don't cut ties once you become 18, right? So when we went to college, fully funded, right, by our parents.
Yeah, when we need to move back home, we don't pay rent. But, you know, we have Caucasian friends or other friends. And it's like, I know some of my friends, when they hit 18, the parents expected rent if they're staying at home. And some of them did not get assistance or maybe only got partial assistance to go to college.
Yeah, I mean, even now when we've closed a business in our mid 30s and we have a child, both sets of parents said, hey, we'll give you this stipend per month to make it through these tough times, as if we were, you know, children in school who needed allowance. And for us, it's invaluable, right? And so just grateful for that.
And I definitely know some other Asian restaurant operators that are friends with us, good friends with us. And, you know, they've kind of said the same thing, like, yeah, really, without our parents helping us out, we wouldn't have made it to the first year for a restaurant, because restaurants are just that hard. And if you're solely relying on yourself, you're probably going to fail.
Or other people who open restaurants, they have investors, and we're like, that sounds great, but our investors are our friends and Mr. Wu, Mrs. Wu, Mr. Fang, and Mrs. Fang. So they don't have super deep pockets, and our goal is to not lean on them, right? Our goal is like any other kid is to fly on your own, but we're not going to deny the fact that we have this resource and this privilege. And, you know, our parents moved here and got secure jobs and worked them for 30, 40 years so that we would have this opportunity, right? This opportunity to open a restaurant, to pursue our passions. These are both things that they didn't do. That's not their mindset. Their mindset is, you know, get as much education, to get the best paying job, to support the family.
So then do you feel like the pandemic also revealed any structural inequalities? I know that you said like someone was like joking about you serving bats or something.
I mean, I think there are always going to be racist and ignorant people out there, but I think what COVID really did shine a light on is the extent of the chasm between the haves and the have-nots. Right? So if you have the resources and if you have the type of job where you can easily work from home, and hire a nanny and still send your kids to daycare and whatnot, and make a pod, then not to say that you're relatively unscathed, but you have layers of protection and you have more resources to deal with the stress, right? And to kind of not have it all be on your shoulders. You still can have some sort of support system. But there are a lot of people who still have to work multiple jobs, and they have multiple kids, and it puts them in an impossible situation, and they may not have access to unemployment benefits or this or that benefit. And it really just, to me, I feel like it lays bare that inequality.
Also, with virtual schooling, kids may not have access to internet. They may not have anyone supervising them. I've cooked for really, really wealthy families since the pandemic started, offering, you know, high-end tasting menus at home, and they're having parties, 10 people at a time, you know, and just as if nothing's changed. And then, you know, like, oh, we're going to go to our vacation home in Aspen or somewhere until this blows over. It's just like, that's nice to have that option. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, it's actually made me think, so when we closed on August 28th, right, about 2 weeks ago, the Houston Chronicle wrote an article about our closure. And I didn't read it till a few days later, maybe a week later, just because we were getting inundated with messages and whatnot, and I just really needed to step away from social media. But I finally went back to read the Houston Chronicle article online. And I did something that you're never supposed to do, but you always feel compelled to, which is I read the comment section. And one comment is at the very bottom. It said, just another Chinese-owned What did it say?
Just essentially just another Chinese-owned business closed by the Chinese virus. And my first thought that I wanted to reply with, just another piece of shit comment by a piece of shit individual.
And so my gut reaction was to create a fake email account, to create a fake username, so it wouldn't come back to the restaurant, to write what he had said. And I was like, you know what? There's no need to hide behind anonymity. Like, we straight up, as two Chinese Americans, these are our names, Diane Willett, we don't like what you said.
Do you think that was kind of like a setback then for the perspectives of Asian Americans, and or was that just revealing what people already thought?
I think it's just revealing what some people already think. I think it's just the way the world is. I don't know that. I think pre-COVID, someone would make just as stupid a comment. I think it's just out there.
I mean, it's the same with, when it rains, it pours, right? So COVID happened, and then Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter happened. And we had so much on our plates that we didn't have time to really read about what was going on. But at some point, again, with social media and us being quote unquote kind of like public figures, people expect you to say something, right? Because they would argue that if you don't say anything, it means you're complicit. It means that you think that Black lives don't matter. So I didn't do the whole Blackout Tuesday thing because I didn't want to jump on some trend that didn't have a lot of meaning. And so I kind of, did a little bit of reading, and I thought, what would be an appropriate response that was authentic? Because with our social media and with everything that we post online, it's not a PR person. It's literally just us. And so the question is, what do we want to say? And to be honest, we're not very political people. We're not very, we don't have a lot of strong beliefs. We're not religious, whatnot. And so.
But we believe in being good people.
We believe in being good people. We would like to think that we're good people. And so in reading and what Black Lives Matter stands for, we're like, we agree. We agree that systemic racism is an issue. We agree that a lot of the times, there's a lot of unfairness and there's a lot of unnecessary police brutality. So it's like, we agree and we take a stand. And basically solidarity. This is not our fight, but that also doesn't mean that we should be silent. So we will stand beside, right? We have friends that are Black, we have coworkers who are Black. It's like, we recognize that this is an issue. We will listen to your thoughts. We will be a megaphone for whatever you want to promote. Just know that we are allies, right? So I think I posted a graphic that said something like Asians stand with Black Lives Matter or something. And then I was surprised that we got on Instagram a direct message from an Asian customer. It really shocked me to the core. Like, I had no response. I was like, oh my God, this is a person that I said hi to. And I didn't know her very well because she was a customer. She's an Asian customer who basically said that we are brainwashed
by CNN.
Black people are lazy. This, that, and the other, right? And it went on and on and on. And I was so shocked by her response. I didn't know what to say. I had to take a deep breath. And then she sent me a video of Candace Owens. I didn't know who Candace Owens was at the time. I watched the video. I kept waiting for the video to change. And then when I finished the video, I was like, oh my God, this is a crazy video. This is crazy. And so I started reading into it, and I just started showing it to my Black friends. I was like, who is this person? Like, how do you feel about him? They were like offended to the core. So I was like, okay, this is terrible. And so I asked them for like, what's a really good response? Like, what would you want me to say? And then I kind of took all that and then I responded to her thinking like, okay, we can have.
Technically, I responded.
Oh, he responded because like I was just pissed. And so he responded.
I crafted a very generic, middle of the road, like, we don't agree with what you said. Let's just agree to disagree. Thank you for being a supporter of BurgerChan. Just very kind of
Not emotional,
right.
which is what I would have been. And then she responds again.
Yeah, no, her response was ridiculous. It was just like, well, if you support defunding the police, the next time you need their help, don't call 911.
And it was at that point that we realized some people just you can't engage with them. Which is right, like having social media, it's a double-edged sword, right? You have that accessibility to like people that you would never talk to in person, for better or worse, right? So you have like all these cool people who are like, oh, we love what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. You're like, yay, thank you. And then you have all these crazy people who are like, I think you're crazy. And I don't even remember the other ones, but it's just like, you have to know when to or like someone replied negatively to our COVID response. It had to do with an incident where we had a sick staff member who at the time tested negative. He tested negative, but he felt sick. And he felt like he really needed to see a doctor, but he didn't feel comfortable driving himself. And we were at work and we're like, we don't know what to do. So I consulted one of my friends who works in the medical industry. I was like, hey, should I call an Uber and send the staff member to the hospital to get checked out? Because I feel like it would weigh on my conscience if I did nothing and something were to happen. And his only form of transportation was going to be later that evening, possibly. And I was like, I don't feel comfortable. And so after consulting with my friend, she's like, yeah, that makes sense because, you know, an ambulance would be really expensive and they may not come out for something that's not truly an emergency. So we did it.
Nor should they. Like, that was the thing, is like, ambulances are in high demand. It's a limited resource. So if he's not bleeding out, but he's in pain, he should not get an ambulance. He should take an Uber.
So anyway, that happened. And then after we had closed for about a week and a half due to COVID, right, to get everyone tested, to be able to get our staff healthy. And by the way, like all of our staff fully recovered and they're fine. We were very transparent about the whole process, about how it's extremely stressful. And I kind of just documented everything in terms of, you know, going to emergency centers and paying $150 a pop for each employee to get tested and lining up in the wee hours of the morning. And I just wanted everyone to know. And so I included that anecdote about how we called an Uber for that employee. And I easily could have left all of that out. I didn't have to say anything. I just felt like people needed to know. And of course, a commenter on Instagram said, you know, how dare you put the safety and life of that Uber driver in danger? And all of a sudden we were getting attacked, and they're like, there's this huge Reddit thread online. And I'm like,
it wasn't huge, but there was a Reddit thread.
There was a Reddit thread.
For Uber drivers.
Whatever. And I'm like, and of course you take it personally because we own this restaurant. And I'm like, and you know, they're being really, really rude to us.
I mean, we asked for professional medical staff opinion, people who are doctors and nurses.
Yeah.
They backed us up. It didn't matter. These people just came and just shit on us, and it's just like, okay, whatever, we're done. Let's move on.
And the thing is, the driver, according to the Uber app, said that they were masked. Our employee was masked. If you have two masked people in the car and they're wearing their masks appropriately, it should be fine. And we had no suspicions that he had COVID at the time. It ended up subsequent tests, he did test positive. But at the time, we had no idea. If we had known that he was COVID positive, perhaps we would have suggested something otherwise. But just given the intel at the time, that was the best decision. And my friend who works in an ER backed this up. And so we crafted this dispassionate, like trying to explain what I just said to you, that we tried to make the best decision at the time. We are sorry that you disagree. But these are the type of people, like, they're not engaging to have a meaningful conversation. They are there to poke and prod and just be the nasty individual. And at some point, you just know when to back off from internet trolls and be like, at this point, you're wasting my time. And I will respond once, maybe twice, not for
just
you, but for other people.
Side.
For other people to see that we have responded and this is what we think. And once it devolves and it's very clear that, like, you're not going to change their mind, then it's like, I've done the best that I can.
And then kind of going back to one of the previous people who DM'd you, what would your advice be for people trying to get rid of the racism between minorities as well?
I don't know. I mean, I think it starts young, right? And so for me, my responsibility is, I
don't think you can really convince people that are set in their ways to not be racist. You would hope that they become respectful. You know, if they have this mental illness, then hopefully they don't reveal it. I think maybe just society in general, schools, celebrities need to make an effort to make sure the next generation are not as influenced by their own parents. If their parents are racist, you know, the parents will die out. Eventually, a new generation comes. That's just, there's always another generation, and all we can hope to do is to make sure each generation is better.
Yeah, I mean, and what I was gonna say is, your circle of control starts from inside and out, right? And so our immediate circle of control, like, I have control. I feel very confident having a conversation with my husband. Like, if I feel like what he said, I don't agree with him, I feel like maybe I could change his mind. Within that circle is also our daughter, right? Our daughter is very impressionable. We hope that, you know, things that we right? So we don't want her to be racist. We want her to be kind. These are things that we can pass on, not only saying to her, but also, you know, in our actions. This is within our circle of influence. And even within our parents and my sister, even though they're family, there's only so much you can do. Like, my dad, who's 70, he will not get a flu shot. I have tried to convince him that he will not get sick from a flu shot, and he's like, it's a non-issue. He's stubborn. He's like, I can take care of myself, and I have to respect that, right? As long as he's not harming other people, he's like, I'm staying at home, I'll be fine. Then I tried, and I realized he's not going to change his mind. But I think that when it comes to racism and it comes to being mean, it's like, if you have bad thoughts and if you don't like someone, I'm not going to try to convince you to do a 180, but I would at least like you to come back to central, which is neutral, which is, at least don't be mean, right? I'm not going to try to get you from here to, oh, be the nicest person in the world. I want you to be like, if you have nothing nice to say, just don't say it. And because I think it's very hard. Like, for instance, I have a friend who's Chinese American. She's very democratic, and her parents are very Republican. And these are her parents, right? And she has arguments with them. And even at that level, neither one can convince the other. And it's just this constant battle. And sometimes you just can't change people's minds, but at least you can be respectful. And I feel like that's part of being a good parent, being a good teacher, being a good member of society, is at least be civil. There are certain things that you think, and I don't need to be a mind reader, and I don't want to be a mind reader, but please don't act on them in public and all these things. And I think, unfortunately, because of the latest presidential leadership, the president has done things and said things that I find inappropriate, regardless of political beliefs, that kind of just diminish all the rules of civility. So it's like, oh, if he can do it, well, now we can do it. And I think that is what I find unacceptable.
And then one of my final questions would be, what would be your advice for people interested in bridging cultures and nations, especially with your like Asian studies background?
I would say listen more than you speak.
Mm-hmm.
Find similarities. I think every culture is different, but we're all the same race. We're all part of the human race. Why can't we focus on that? It shouldn't have to take an alien invasion or some other worldly enemy to make us realize that we should unite as one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of that really starts at a much younger age. I just think wherever you are, the schools should really embrace diversity and help everyone realize that. As a chef, I would like to say through food, but it's kind of cliche. I mean, you don't have to enjoy a culture's food just to be open-minded.
Well, that's all the questions I have. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate hearing you guys' stories.
Thanks for having
Our
us.
pleasure. Yeah.
Have a great day.
You too.